Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about methodological rigor and reproducibility. Methodological rigor and the pursuit of reproducibility are the twin pillars of sound scientific inquiry. They are extremely essential practices that separate reliable, verifiable knowledge from mere conjecture. So, Garima, welcome to our podcast. Let's start the topic by talking about why rigor deserves its very own episode.
Okay, hello everyone. Um, let's begin. One thing I've noticed while reading behavioral and translational neuroscience paper is that the most exciting ideas don't always end up being the most impactful ones. Sometimes it's not just the question that limits a study, it's the methodology. And that's uncomfortable to admit because rigor isn't glamorous. It doesn't sound innovative and it doesn't always make for catchy titles. But over time, especially when you look at which findings actually hold up, you start to realize that methodological rigor is what determines whether research lasts or not. So, in this episode, I want to reflect on some common methodological weaknesses in our field, how PhD level projects can realistically address them, and how supervisors actually access a candidate's understanding of rigor and open science. Um, Overall, we can say that this isn't about blaming individual researchers, it's about understanding the system we are stepping into.
Okay, now let's talk about common methodological weaknesses in behavioral neuroscience. Can you give us few examples?
So that's a very important question to address. One of the most common weakness I see, especially in behavioral studies, is underspecified behavior. By that I mean a task is described but not deeply interrogated. For example, a behavior might be labeled as anxiety-like or depression-like without enough discussion of what process is actually being measured. And that matters because behavior is often multi determined. What looks like avoidance could reflect threat sensitivity, learning history, motor differences, or even fatigue. So, when behavior isn't carefully defined, interpretations become shaky and replication becomes difficult. Another issue is flexibility in analysis. Small choices, such as how trials are excluded, how outliners are handled, or which time window is analyzed, these can meaningfully change results. Often, these decisions are made after seeing the data, sometimes even without ill intent, but still in a way that increases false positive. Thirdly, we can say that there's a sample size and power. Behavioral neuroscience is especially vulnerable here because behavior is noisy by nature. Underpowered studies can produce effects that look real but don't survive replication. And finally, the last weakness which I would like to address is overinterpretation. Sometimes conclusion go far beyond what the data can reasonably support, especially when there's pressure to link findings to clinical relevance. So, taken together, these issues, which are underspecified behavior or flexibility in analysis, sample size and power, or overinterpretation, these do not mean the field is broken. It just means that they do explain why so many findings struggle to replicate.
Right. So let's talk about pre-registration power and multi-site work. And let's bring them to a very, very realistic lens, Garima. You can begin.
Okay, at this point, pre registration, power analysis, and multi site studies are often presented as gold standards. But let's be honest, for a PhD student with limited time, funding, and personnel, they can sound unrealistic. So the question becomes, how can these tools be used sensibly rather than performatively. Starting with pre registration. Pre registration doesn't mean locking yourself into a rigid plan forever. In practice, it means clearly separating what you planned in advance from what you explode later. Even pre registering one primary hypothesis can dramatically improve interpretability. Power analysis is similar. Not every project can be fully powered for small effects, but showing that you have thought about expected effect sizes and adjusted your design accordingly already signals rigor. Sometimes that means focusing on fewer conditions or using within subject designs or prioritizing replication over novelty. All this comes under power analysis. And as for multi site studies, full consortia may be out of reach, but shared protocols aren't. Using standardized tasks, open source code or common analysis pipeline already improves cross lab compatibility. So, rigor at PhD level isn't about doing everything perfectly. In fact, it's about making constraints explicit and designing intelligently within them.
Okay, so I think a very, very pivotal point is behavioral task design, which really determines whether reproducibility is, lost or won. So, can you shed some light upon that?
That's a very crucial question to come up with. In behavioral neuroscience, reproducibility often lives or dies at the level of task design. Small details matter more than we sometimes realize. For example, task instructions, trial structures, contingencies, environmental context, even cultural familiarity with stimuli. For example, a task that works well in one lab or population may not translate directly into another. That's why practices like detailed task documentation, open sharing of stimuli and code, and piloting across diverse samples are so important. Another key practice is process level analysis. Rather than relying on a single summary score, looking at learning curves, reaction time, distribution, or trial by trial dynamics often yields more reproducible insights. And importantly, behavior should be interpreted conservatively. So, calling a task stress related or emotion related should come with clear justification and acknowledgement of alternative explanation. In a way, reproducibility improves when we resist the urge to oversell what a behavior represents.
I totally agree with that. So, in that context, let's talk about reproducibility across labs and various other cultures that we have.
Okay, one aspect of reproducibility that's getting more attention, and rightly so, is cultural and contextual robustness. You see, many behavioral tasks were developed in very specific population, such as a language specific population or a region specific population, something like that. Now, when these tasks are applied elsewhere, assumptions don't always hold up. So, improving reproducibility across cultures mean validating tasks in diverse sample or being careful with language and framing and questioning whether a behavior has the same meaning across context. Now, this doesn't weaken behavioral neuroscience, it strengthens it. It pushes us to separate what's universal from what's context dependent. And for translational research, that distinction is critical.
Right. So, do you happen to have an idea rather that how does the faculty evaluate rigor in PhD applications and things like that?
Okay, so in my opinion, when faculty, review PhD application, they are really expecting students to be methodological experts. Rather, what they are really looking for is how a candidate thinks. Some signals that matter a lot is, for example, do we acknowledge limitations? Do you distinguish hypothesis driven from exploratory work? Do you talk about replication as a value, not a threat? Or do you show familiarity with open science practices? Interestingly, applicants who openly discuss constraints often come across as more mature, not less. Saying this is what my design can answer and this is what it can't is a strength. It shows intellectual honesty. And ultimately, that's what rigor is about, not perfection, but transparency.
Right. So let's come back to the closing reflections for this topic. So, why do you think that rigor is not optional?
So, when I think about methodological rigor and reproducibility, I don't see them as checklists. I see them as habits, habits of slowing down, of being precise with behavior, of resisting over interpretation, and of designing studies that other can actually build on. As someone hoping to pursue a PhD in behavioral and psychiatric neuroscience, this mindset feels essential because exciting ideas may get attention, but rigorous ones are what moves the field forward. So, this is what I would like to conclude with, and I would like everyone thank you for listening to me patiently. It really means a lot.
Thank you, Garima, for being our guest. It was great to have you as a guest. Thank you, listeners.